Hi, I'm Pam Fox. Thank you for joining. Tonight we're going to be making one of my favorites. It's a soup. It's butternut squash soup, and I love it. And so this was a really simple recipe to adapt for this challenge because it has no common trigger foods and it's plant-based. So if you're joining us this month for the 28-day anti-reflux plant-based challenge, that's what we're doing. So I'm going to be throwing this soup together. It's not going to take very long. I'm actually going to do it in the Instant Pot. And then we're going to be talking about trigger foods and why they do what they do, why they cause problems, just a little bit of understanding as to why it's so important to eliminate these foods during this healing phase. Doesn't mean you can't eat them forever. I eat almost all the foods on that list, with the exception of I don't smoke cigarettes, but I eat all the other foods, I think. Well, I don't drink soda either, and I rarely drink coffee, but I eat most of the foods. Okay, so this recipe in the files is actually a butternut squash soup with roasted Brussels sprouts that I like to just throw right onto the soup. I am not very hungry, so I'm not going to do the roasted Brussels sprouts. I'm just going to make the soup tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I like to do with the Instant Pot, if you guys don't have one, you don't need one for this, obviously you can just do it on a crock pot on your stovetop. Since we moved into this very little apartment, what you see here is my kitchen, like from here to the end of that sink. This is my kitchen, and then I had my dad make me this butcher block island so I can store all of my gadgets here underneath. But because I'm so low on space, and because my oven is actually pretty bad. It's like the burners, some of the burners don't work and they're really small. So I've just been using my Instant Pot a lot. I really, really like it. I highly recommend it. So we'll go ahead and get started. And there's a saute function on the Instant Pot. So what I'm doing here, and I don't cook with any oil. I rarely cook with any oil. Let's see, you guys can't really see the board, can you? Yeah, you can. You can see. I don't really cook. I usually don't cook with oil. So what's nice with this Instant Pot is you just throw everything in, kind of get it sauteing with some water, and then you turn on the pressure cook function and let it do its thing. And with something like this, it doesn't have to cook for very long. So this recipe calls for a leek. Remember that we're avoiding onions and garlic on this challenge, but leeks are okay. I'm going to go ahead, these are kind of small, so I'm going to do, this calls for 2, but I'm just going to go ahead and do, and you can kind of coarse chop these because we're going to be putting it, you can either put it in the blender when it's done to make it nice and creamy, or you can use an immersion blender right in the Instant Pot. I have an immersion blender, but I just prefer to use my blender. It's actually a little bit more work to use the blender, but that's just the way I do it. It gets it nice and creamy. You'll see what I mean when we do it later. I have a way of doing it. So this is a leftover bell pepper from, what did we make earlier? What did we make last week with the bell pepper? This is leftover from that. Can't remember. Oh, the potatoes on Tuesday. So I don't know if you can hear this, but it's just kind of sizzling back here. It's starting to saute those foods. So if it starts to get kind of burnt, you can just add a little bit of water. And I'm actually going to use this one too. So the recipe calls for 1 pepper, but because I had that one left over and I don't see myself using it, we'll go ahead and throw this one in there as well. And because we're going to just puree this, your chopping size really doesn't matter. That pressure cooker is going to cook everything up really soft and well done, and then we're going to put it in the blender. So I know I just said that. Saying it again. So this is usually what I do. I chop, I dump, I give it a little stir, maybe I add a little bit of water. So we're going to put in 2 carrots. These are organic carrots, so I'm not really concerned about peeling them. I'm just going to kind of take off some of the skin. smells delicious. So normally I would put lots of garlic in this recipe. We're not going to be doing that. I think it's probably going to taste just as good. All right, the squash. So whenever I make this soup, what I do is I put, you guys can use any squash for this. This is a butternut squash. And I just, like earlier in the day or even the day before, I just put it in the oven for about an hour. What is it, like 400 degrees, 375, about 375 degrees. And now it's nice and soft. Okay, so then you just cut it down the middle. And then you have these guys. And then you just remove the seeds. Excuse me. So you just scoop those out with a spoon. It's really easy. And so now this flesh comes out pretty easy. This one's kind of hard. I didn't cook it for quite as long as I should have because I had to leave today. So I think what I'll do, one is soft and the other end is kind of hard. I was afraid that was going to happen. I had to run out to the bakery today, so it's coming out pretty easily. It's not, sometimes you can just squeeze it out with one hand. I had to run out, there's a bakery just like a couple of blocks from my apartment. My husband and I are having our 1-year anniversary for our business that we opened up almost a year ago. And I was in charge of getting the cake. Which I actually, don't tell my husband, but I forgot. Well, I thought our anniversary was next weekend, but it's this weekend. So I kind of had it on the radar for next weekend. Anyway, so I remembered, thank goodness, and I went down and had a custom cake made from like a renowned chef here in the area. This cake better be good. It's even going to be vegan. I said, do you make vegan cakes? He said, sure. It's going to have a stout beer in it, like a chocolate, coffee, and chili stout beer with like a amaretto icing and strawberry filling. This cake, it should be epic. It should be quite good. We'll see. I'm looking forward to it though. So yeah, you just put that in. That's still sauteing. It's burning just a little bit. It's not burning, but it's starting to brown at the bottom, which is great. I don't mind that, but I don't want it to burn, so I'm just going to add a touch of water. And then we're getting ready to add our liquid here so that we can go ahead and cook this. So you want to add like a box of veggie stock. Hi, Martha. Oh, good. Oh, yeah, I love potatoes too. So we're going to add a box of veggie stock if you have it. I don't know if you saw in the notes, but I use mushroom stock. And so how I do that, I already talked a little bit about this, but how I do that is I keep this mushroom powder available, and I make this from dehydrated mushrooms that I bought at the store, put in my blender, and they just turns it into like this flour. So this is so potent, and I love the smell, but this is just a variety of wild mushrooms that have been blended into like a flour or a powder. So I'm just going to put a couple of spoonfuls of that in there. So this is my vegetable broth. Now I'm going to add the water. About 4 cups of water, and you can adjust this. You can add more or less depending on your soup. Like if you put in more vegetables, you want to put in more water. And then also for the stock, a little bit of the liquid aminos, these Bragg's liquid aminos, which is a salty soy sauce replacement. So this is what it gives it its salty flavor. So you're going to put in a couple of spoonfuls of that. I'll have to look at the recipe to see exactly. Oh, where's the recipe? Let's see. So the vegetable or the mushroom broth is 4 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of the mushroom powder, and about a 1/4 cup of Bragg's liquid aminos. And I'm not going to use that much. I usually go a little light on salt. I love salt, but you can always add in more later. You can't take away. So I usually kind of am conservative with it. And you can always add salt to your bowl of soup. So that's looking really good. So we're going to add the 4 cups of water. And what I consider the secret ingredient, and that's the coconut milk. This is what just is a really wonderful, rich, creamy flavor, coconutty flavor, I suppose. Hey, Terry. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that cake, man. It sounds epic. I sat with the chef and he came up with all kinds of ideas and really customized our cake. I was just going to go down to the local Safeway and order it, and someone was telling me, no, you got to go to this guy. You got to go to this guy. They call him Chef. I don't even know his name. And I only gave him 2 days notice, so I was feeling pretty grateful that he accommodated me, that he was able to do that for me. So I know what he'll be doing early Saturday morning. I asked him if he'd do vegan cakes. He said, sure. He goes, wait, what do you mean by vegan? He goes, you mean like gluten-free, sugar-free? I said, no, just no dairy, no eggs. He's, oh yeah, that's easy. I can do that. All right, so we're going to add a whole can of this. This is an organic coconut milk. Ooh, and you don't even really, you just, with the Instant Pot, this is what I love. You just kind of dump it all in, especially since I'm going to be putting this in the blender when it's done. Ah! Okay, so now it's just a matter of turning this on to the pressure cook mode. So literally you just hit pressure cook and it's already set for 10 minutes, and we really don't even need that much because everything's pretty much already cooked. It's just going to be heating it through and softening up those vegetables. What the heck? I don't know if you guys are still there. I hope you guys are still there. So anyway, I've just set this for 8 minutes on pressure cook. So that's going to go. And what I like to do is turn this around just because the vent is here. And so it's going to be shooting up steam here. And I don't want it to go into my cupboard. Okay. And I want to make sure this is on vent. You have a vent option or a seal option, so we want it on vent. Okay, so as I was saying before, I'm not going to do the Brussels sprouts today. This is ready to go, and so when that's done, we're going to be, basically, I didn't put it in the instructions, did I? Yeah, oh I did, okay. So you can use an immersion blender or a blender. Okay, good, thank you, Terry. What I do is I take it out in 2 batches. I blend part of it. I blend most of it, probably 2/3 of it, so that it's really super creamy. So I put it in the blender and high power blender it for, I don't know, a good 20 or 30 seconds, which makes it super creamy. And I'll put that back in the pot, and then I'll put the rest of it in the blender, and I just kind of partially blend that. So you just have this really creamy, like bisque soup with a little bit of chunks of those carrots and celery, and I don't know, just that little bit of bite to it, to me, is perfect. All right, so our topic is trigger foods, and kind of the explanation as to why we avoid them and what they do, what they're doing kind of behind the scenes. So this is just the list in your files of your foods to eat during the healing phase and foods to avoid during this month-long challenge. So we're just going to kind of go through these foods to avoid and why. So we'll start with, well, first of all, I'm going to give a really obvious example as to kind of help you see what's going on in terms of that lower esophageal sphincter. So again, if you have reflux, that means acid is making its way up into your esophagus, and it has to go through the lower esophageal sphincter to do that. I'm going to call it the LES just because it's easier to say. So the LES, its job is to clamp down nice and tight. It's a muscle, and its job is to clamp down nice and tight and prevent reflux, keep the contents in the stomach. And so I sometimes call it the gatekeeper. It'll allow food in, but it's not supposed to allow food out. It's supposed to clamp down really tight. And so then the question then becomes, for those of you with reflux, why? Why is my LES not clamping down tight? And if you talk to your doctor or you go on any of these conventional websites and you start to investigate this, you'll see the same thing over and over and over. You'll see these trigger foods listed, and you'll hear this common phrase that the LES is weakened in the presence of spicy foods, for example, or smoking cigarettes or alcohol, these different trigger foods, that it's weakened. And so really, I just want to get across one thing, and that is for us to better understand what is happening when that lower esophageal sphincter is weakened. Because essentially, it's more than, I mean, if you think of something that's weak, it's not very strong, or it's just chilling, or it's lazy, it's weak. And there's more than that that's going on a cellular level, and that's what you really need to understand, because when you do, you'll be more careful to avoid these foods during this healing phase, because you'll understand why. So when we think about cigarette smoking, this is kind of a no-brainer. So we all know that cigarette smoking is bad for us. We know that it's toxic. We know that that smoke is like poison, right? And so when we inhale cigarette smoke, it goes down the windpipe and into the lungs, but it goes down the esophagus too. And Dr. Jonathan Aviv, the author of the Acid Watcher Diet, says that 100% of cigarette smokers have reflux. They have GERD, 100%. Which he doesn't have a reference to back that up, but I believe it. I believe it. So that poison is getting into the esophagus, and the LES is exposed. The esophagus is exposed to that toxin. And if you smoke, you don't just smoke on your birthday. You usually smoke multiple times a day. So it's repetitive exposure. So now, if you think on the cellular level of the cells within the esophagus, within the lower esophageal sphincter, and those cells are being exposed to poison on a repetitive basis. So then the question then becomes, well then, what's happening on a cellular level? And that's where we need to understand free radicals. And most of you have heard probably of free radicals. Martha says, I haven't had acid reflux this week while on the challenge. Yay, Martha! Thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. I'm really happy for you. But that's pretty typical. Pretty typical. And that's why we're doing this. So keep it up. So free radicals. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a 101 explanation on what a free radical is. I'm just leaning on my cutting board with my white sweater. You guys are probably all going, ew, Pam, what are you doing? It's not that dirty. There's just a little bit of carrot juice and leek juice on there. So on the cellular level, so again, going back to that I keep pointing here, the LES is actually down here. The UES is up here. It's the upper esophageal sphincter, which can also become damaged and injured and weakened. So free radical is basically at the cellular level when a cell becomes damaged by some type of toxin. So it might be something in your environment, it might be something in your diet, it might be something, it's toxin exposure. So usually, what we breathe, what we drink, what we eat, those are the things that your LES are going to be exposed to, right? And so the cells, when they become a little bit damaged and then repetitively damaged, they will, when they become damaged, they will, in an effort to repair or stabilize, they will bind with another molecule, usually an oxygen molecule. And that's when a free radical is formed, is simply through this, that. And another way to think of it is oxidation. So like if you cut an apple in half and the inside starts to turn brown, right? Like an apple can sit on your counter for a long time, and it's time you cut it in half, it starts to deteriorate, right? Those cells start to oxidate. And so the same thing happens with those free radicals. They bind with oxygen molecule, they produce a free radical, and those free radicals within the body then are injured, just like the cells of that apple are injured from the knife slicing through them and then exposed to the oxygen, they begin to deteriorate. Okay, and so this is happening on the cellular level, and the easiest way to put it is just it's an injury. You have injured cells. Okay, and so unfortunately though, when we have free radicals roaming throughout the body, then that sets us up for those injured cells want to heal. And so what happens when something's injured? The body will flood that area with what's needed to begin the healing process. This is known as inflammation. And so hopefully you can see this cycle. You start with an injured cell, Then you have a free radical, then you have inflammation. And what happens when you have inflammation? You have swelling, you have redness, you have pain, you have inability to function, right? So your LES is unable to function because it's injured and it's swollen. And so if we think of it that way, if you think of it as, okay, my LES is injured because of toxic overload, and it doesn't help if acid is splashing up on it all the time because your stomach is squeezing and pushing up against the diaphragm, and that LES is pushed against the diaphragm, and that pressure. Or it doesn't help if you've got bloating, okay, and there's pressure there pushing those contents upward towards the LES. So, I mean, it's not really a simple explanation. As you can see, there kind of are a lot of different contributors that can contribute to this, but this is why we do this challenge, is because a lot of it starts with the food, okay? It starts with the food. Now, if you don't know, my specialty is helping people reverse their hiatal hernias. And the reason I really wanted to do, oh, that smells really good. The reason I really wanted to do this challenge is because the diet is so foundational to healing and reversing a hiatal hernia. You can learn how to move your stomach down, you can learn how to strengthen your diaphragm, but if you're avoiding this, if you're avoiding the diet part, then it's like running an uphill battle, is that what they say? Fighting an uphill battle, 3 steps forward, 4 steps backwards. So you have to address the diet part of this equation. Unless your diet is perfect and you have a hiatal hernia because of some type of a trauma, or maybe it's strictly from a pregnancy, or maybe you were born with a hiatal hernia. There are other reasons we can have a hiatal hernia besides diet, but most of the time, and I'm just guessing here, the vast majority of the time is my guess, that it's very, very diet related, because we see 1 in 5 hiatal hernias in this country where we eat the standard westernized diet. You go to countries where they eat a higher fiber diet, you know, with very little meat, dairy, and eggs, no junk food, and hiatal hernias are practically unheard of. They look at their stomachs and they're way down here underneath the diaphragm. They're not crammed up. Ours are like crammed. Most people have their stomach is crammed against their diaphragm, or in the case of hiatal hernia, through. Okay, so why did I start talking about hiatal hernia? Oh, because this diet is so foundational to reversing a hiatal hernia. And most people with reflux have a hiatal hernia. They oftentimes go hand in hand. You may have never gotten a diagnosis for one. You may have it and not know it. Maybe you have a diagnosis, but they oftentimes go hand in hand. So, or you may not have one, and that's fine too. So Saturday, we're going to be talking all about hiatal hernia. So we're going to move on for now, but come back on Saturday because I'm going to be sharing some great information that I normally charge for. So I sell a 3-hour-long course all about how to reverse a hiatal hernia, and it has information about diet in there as well. But I'm going to be sharing a lot of that information this Saturday in my live Q&A. Martha wants to know how long until I can start healing my hiatal hernia. That's the million-dollar question that everyone wants to know the answer to, and there is no answer because everyone's hiatal hernia is a different size. Everyone's hiatal hernia is a different age. Everyone has different lifestyle. Different diets, different jobs, different, it just depends. It really depends. I've only had one person tell me that they got success on day 1, and months went by before they had symptoms again, and then they did the exercises again and they felt fine. That's happened once. Most people, it takes a longer time. It took me a couple of months. That's probably going to be annoying, but that's releasing steam in the background. So if you hear that, that's what it is. So Martha, I don't know how long it'll take you to heal. I can never answer that. It's going to be different for everybody. But you're on a really, really good track because you're doing the foundational thing, which is taking care of the diet and healing the gut first. Okay, so when you start incorporating, I don't know if you're one of my students, but I don't think you are. When you start incorporating the exercises that actually move the stomach down, and you start being aware of and understanding all of the things that push your stomach up, and you learn how to strengthen your diaphragm, then that healing can take place. So, but we're going to move on because I'm going to be talking all about that on Saturday. Hi, Susan. Awesome, thank you. Glad you're here. Okay, so let's move on. So we were talking about cigarette smoke. It's toxic on a cellular level, causes injury to your lower esophageal sphincter, which results in inflammation, and this results in the lower esophageal sphincter being unable to perform, which is to clamp down tight. Okay? Think of a sprained ankle, right? You roll your ankle, it swells up, it hurts, it's red, it's puffy, it's swollen. It's unable to now do its job. You don't go and run a marathon on that ankle, right? You've got to back off. You've got to give that ankle the support it needs to heal, right? And so when we eat foods, and like going back to the cigarette example, when you smoke multiple times a day, you're just re-injuring. It never gets a chance to heal, and the disease just progresses and progresses and progresses. So that's a really obvious kind of way for you to look at this. Now, that's cigarettes, which is probably the worst thing you can do if you're trying to fix your GERD, your reflux. But also, when it comes to the formation of free radicals, so we have on the list high-fat foods, including meat, dairy, and eggs. We have highly processed foods, also so going back, meat, dairy, and eggs, and processed oils. These are your high-fat foods. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about common trigger foods that weaken or injure the lower esophageal sphincter, and these are the foods we want to avoid during this challenge. So your moderate to highly processed foods, so your junk foods. These foods can also be high in fat. They're also filled with toxic material, you know, high fructose corn syrup, chemicals, preservatives, genetically modified foods. So we want to avoid those as well. Anything fried is going to be highly, again, it's going to be a high-fat food, especially when we start to talk about, you know, trans fats and homogenized oils and all of that. They're highly toxic, so we want to get them out of the diet. We already mentioned smoking, and then sodas, same thing. Pop, soda pop, highly, you know, a lot of high fructose corn syrup, which is a genetically modified food, carbonation. So these are just examples of foods that can injure the cells at the cellular level. Awesome. Good, Carrie. All right, so let's move on to chocolate and coffee. So in chocolate and coffee, they have what's known in them as methylxanthine. And methylxanthine is a muscle relaxant. So your esophagus and your lower esophageal sphincter are smooth muscle, and methylxanthine is a smooth muscle relaxant. So you can probably put 2 and 2 together there. The chocolate and the coffee contain a component that actually causes that muscle to dilate and relax. So again, your lower esophageal sphincter, the gatekeeper of the stomach, needs to clamp down and keep those contents of the stomach, but instead now you're eating something that's causing it to relax. And then moving on, well, let's talk about raw onions and garlic. So raw onions and garlic are what's known as carminative, and carminatives regulate your gut contraction. So your stomach, again, is muscle, and there's a mechanical process that takes place besides the chemical process of the acid acidifying your food. The mechanical process is the musculature churning and contracting and squeezing of that food. And so if this is your stomach, you know, and your esophagus is here, and you have this squeezing and contracting and churning, what happens then in that process is an upward motion. The stomach moves up, and again, it gets pushed into the diaphragm. And this in itself, and again, a lot of this are all of these things coming together and really just bombarding the LES. But this in itself, this carminative reaction of the contractions of the stomach, pushing the stomach against the diaphragm, pushes that LES against the diaphragm, puts pressure on it, and can be another reason why, you know, if you think about like a valve on a beach ball, right, that you squeeze it in order to blow air in. So if you've got pressure on your valve, that's going to make it less likely to be able to keep those contents in the stomach. So I talk a lot about pressure when we talk about reversing a hiatal hernia, and understanding and avoiding and eliminating all these different types of intragastric pressure. I hope that's not too loud for you guys. I'm trying to talk louder, so my neighbors are probably like, who's she talking to? Okay, they're moving too fast, I can't read them. So getting back to raw onions and garlic. So for some people, if they cook the onions and garlic, there's no issue. I know for me, raw onions and garlic were a huge issue for my reflux. I can eat them now though. Occasionally, like today, I ate a whole thing of store-bought hummus, which is why I'm not very hungry. And it had raw garlic in it. And I did notice I'm really in tune with my body, see? So I feel the stomach. I feel it cramping and pushing up against my diaphragm. And when that happens, I experience a little bit of mild nausea and indigestion, but I know how to move my stomach back down and get it away from my diaphragm, so it's not an issue. So I do eat raw onions and garlic, and they're very beneficial, and I was looking for some different studies to help support that. There's actually all kinds of studies that both support the benefit of support garlic and onions, the benefits, and also, you know, the opposite. So I think it's just one of those things where everyone's different. Everyone's different. And so, you know, what's one person's medicine is another person's poison. But they are on the list of common trigger foods. So during this month, you want to avoid them unless you absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're no issue for you. So then the final foods, you know, you've got vinegar, citrus, mint, tomatoes, and spices. So these would all be considered, you know, most of us would consider these kind of, you know, healthy and beneficial foods. You know, they use spices all around the world for medicinal purposes. Citrus, you know, oranges are filled with vitamin C. Vinegar is a fermented food. So why then are these bad? Well, you can look at a couple of ways. One, they're all more of acidic foods, which all of these foods on the list pretty much are. I mean, they all range in a different pH in terms of acidity. I mean, some of your seafoods are going to be lower in acid. Egg whites are not acidic. But generally speaking, these foods are going to be your more acidic foods, and that's one of the reasons why we avoid them when it comes to reflux. And so one of the reasons for that is simply because you already have, in the case, if you already have an established, like a hiatal hernia or reflux, GERD, LPR, you already have acid exposure. And that means that the tissues are already inflamed, injured, and sensitive and irritated, right? And so then you eat more acidic foods like orange juice, for example, you know, or coffee is highly acidic. But something healthy, or seemingly healthy, like orange juice, and all that acid, you know, the tissues are exposed to more acid. And so just a little bit more about that. When the contents of your stomach, that acid in your stomach, when it refluxes into the esophagus, it also carries with it pepsin, which is a digestive enzyme. Now, pepsin has been coined a lot of different things, like a wandering enzyme, a floating enzyme, a Velcro enzyme, a sticky enzyme. So you kind of get the picture, but the acid can come up and you can drink a bunch of water to flush that acid back down, but the pepsin will linger. It will burrow into the tissues, it will linger and stick, and it will remain. And by itself, it usually doesn't cause much of a problem. But what then happens when pepsin is in the presence of anything acidic is it activates the pepsin. And it is a digestive enzyme that digests protein. So now if you can imagine, you've got pepsin in your esophagus, it's exposed to acid, the acid in your food, like a cup of coffee or a glass of orange juice, or the acid that's coming back up out of your stomach. So now that pepsin is exposed to the acid, it's activated, and it begins to do its job, which is to digest protein. Well, what protein does it have available? It has the tissues of your esophagus, right? It's a muscle, it's protein. And so it will begin to digest and deteriorate those tissues, which is why you might have a sore throat all the time, or it's why you might have a lot of phlegm in your throat, because your body's trying to produce all this phlegm to try to protect those tissues from the acid and from the pepsin and from the deterioration. So this is why when we do this plant-based challenge that we also eliminate these acidic foods, because the acidic foods are going to activate with the pepsin and create more issues. Okay, so again, your spices, well, they're all acidic, but you know, some of your healthier foods, like a vinegar, a fermented food, which some people, you know, swear it helps, you know, remedy all their ailments, you know, apple cider vinegar. But for those of you especially with, I am talking so loud, with LPR, laryngopharyngeal reflux. That's where the acid is making its way all the way up to the top of your esophagus and even beyond into the ears, the sinuses, even into the lungs, otherwise known as silent reflux. If you have LPR, you really, really, really want to eliminate these trigger foods from your diet during the healing phase, which again, maybe a month, it may be a couple months. Everyone is going to be different. Once you feel that you've experienced a substantial amount of healing, you can begin to reintroduce some of these foods. Now, I wouldn't reintroduce smoking cigarettes. I wouldn't reintroduce Pepsi, Coca-Cola, but you can certainly reintroduce, things like tomatoes, a rich source in lycopene, cooked tomatoes, known to be very beneficial unless you're having a sensitivity to nightshades. Garlic and onions, vinegar, citrus. You certainly want to reintroduce, even coffee. If you want to try reintroducing coffee, I can tolerate coffee now just fine. There was a time it made me very, very symptomatic, and I avoided it like the plague. Or I just drank it anyway and suffered the consequences. But I drink coffee now and I have no issues. So you've got to heal the gut. You've got to heal the LES. If you have a hiatal hernia, you need to reverse your hiatal hernia. Once you address all of these things, then these symptoms from GERD and LPR, ideally speaking, will be a thing of the past. Okay. All right, so the questions have gone by, and I will answer those after the live. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is done. It's still venting, and while it's still venting, it will not let me open this lid. So I'm going to speed up the process. There's an additional release button here, and that's just letting out more of the steam. If we want to get this blended so we can try it. If you guys have additional comments, make sure you post them in the comment section below, and I will get to those after the live stream. I appreciate when you post your comments below as opposed to private messaging me. Although if you do have something that you want to keep private, you can private message me. I don't mind. It's easier for me to go and respond to all of your questions all at once in one area than to be bouncing all over the place. Plus, if you post a question below, others might have the same question, and if I answer it, it will benefit you and others. All right, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's just venting the steam, and it's almost there. It won't let me open it as long as there's still pressure in the pot. It's just a safety issue. I'm just using a straw. It's getting hot. Use something else. So, and also you guys post your experiences below. I really appreciate it, and so will others if you post how you're doing. If you notice any improvement, we really want to hear about that. It just inspires the whole group to know that it's working. And I'm not going to guarantee that this challenge is going to work for everybody. In fact, for some people, it may make you feel worse. It just really depends. This is a high fiber diet, and for anyone with, IBS or SIBO, a high fiber diet, especially when brought on quickly, like we just kind of jumped into it on day one. If you're not used to a lot of fiber in your diet, can cause additional problems of bloating and cramping and that kind of a thing. So everyone's going to be different, and those certainly, I talk about this a lot, those certainly are issues that can be addressed and remedied. If your gut flora is unable to digest large amounts of fiber, that means that your gut flora needs some support and some help. And when we support and help our gut biome and maintain it as best we possibly can and have the healthiest, most diversified gut flora, that's just going to be good for your overall health, for your immunity, for your brain function, things like depression and anxiety. It's just really fascinating when they study people who are really, really healthy, and they look at their gut flora and they see just this diverse nation of bacteria living in their gut. Very, very diverse. Many, many different strains of bacteria living in their gut. We need a large variety of different strains of bacteria. And that's going to be different from person to person. It's going to be different geographically. You know, they look at different bacterial strains from country to country, and they'll see entirely different strains of bacteria. You know, and people who were super duper sanitary, you know, kind of germaphobe type people, that used to be me. You'll see a less diversification of the gut microbiome. People who've taken a lot of antibiotics have oftentimes wiped out the bacteria in their gut. And so we need all of this bacteria in order to digest, to digest our food. So. This shouldn't take too much longer. It's taking a long time for some reason. In there we go. So be patient if you want to see me make the rest of this soup. I have a feeling this would be an issue, but there's really no other way to speed this along. It's just got to release all that pressure before I can open it. The nice thing about the Instant Pot, though, is typically I will put food in it, set the timer, and then just go about doing whatever, cleaning, working, leave, whatever, and then, you know, come back an hour later, and it's just, you just open it up, and it keeps it warm at the perfect temperature, and it's just ready to pour and to eat. Well, in this case, we're going to blend it, but if I was making like a chili, or the winter noodle soup, or the corn chowder, you just literally, you know, walk away and you come back an hour later and it's perfect. There we go. Okay, so this is hot. Normally I would let this cool, so I'm going to be very careful. Don't worry, I'll be very careful. So like I said, I'm going to do this in batches. I'm going to do 2 separate batches. You could eat this just like this and it would be awesome. Of course, I didn't chop up that squash. Alright, so I need to do a little bit of adjusting here in my tiny kitchen. Make sure this is on good and tight because it's hot. Okay, here comes the butternut squash soup. Like a bisque, very creamy. So that's that. Now I'm going to put the rest of it in there, and I'm not going to blend it up quite so creamy. This is just the way I like it. I like just a little bit of bite in a really smooth, creamy soup. So you can just put it all in here and blend it, but I just find I can't get it just how I like it when I do it that way. I don't know if that makes sense. It probably sounds really dumb. I'll make sure I get all the chunks, and then we'll be good to go. So this one I'm just going to blend it a little bit. Just like that. And I'm going to add that to the soup. And that is that. So we'll taste it and see if it's missing anything without the garlic. So this is garlic-free, onion-free. It does have leeks in it. Oh, it smells divine. So tonight I'm drinking water kefir, which is a fermented beverage that's rich in probiotics. Really cheap and easy to make. And I will do a video on this, but there are tons of videos on YouTube if you want to look ahead and if you're interested in what this is. It is considered acidic, so it may be something that you wait. I'm going to be sharing the recipe for this at the end of this month-long challenge, because it may be something you want to wait and then do in the maintenance, maybe play around with in the maintenance phase, which is what you're going to start after the healing phase. So again, particularly if you have LPR, drinking an acidic beverage, even though it's going to help stimulate and produce bacteria in the gut, the acid again pairs with the pepsin and activates the pepsin to do its job. All right, so let's try this. And by the way, I will just be dumping this back in the Instant Pot, and it's great because if I'm home all day, I'll just put it on the keep warm and I'll eat it for lunch, and then when it's time for dinner, it's just ready and I go back to the pot and I serve it up for dinner. And then at night, sometimes I just keep it on warm all night long and eat it for breakfast. I don't know. It might seem kind of weird, but it's delicious. It's wonderful and delicious. And it's got little chunks of carrot in there. So if you do decide, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Eileen, I am going to answer your question though. If you do decide to do this recipe, you'll notice that it has the roasted Brussels sprouts. So that's really good in this as well. You roast your Brussels sprouts in the oven, and they just go right on top into the soup, and it's wonderful. They're roasted with a little bit of sugar and salt. So we use the date sugar, which really isn't a sugar, it's just dates, but it's a great sweetener. And I actually have been using that in my matcha tea, and it's delicious. I actually love it. I think it's going to become one of my staples. It's really, really good. It's actually better in that tea. It's actually better than sugar, in my opinion. So I did want to mention though, there was a typo on the, where did I see a typo? On the roasted Brussels sprouts. So I apologize for that, but it says a teaspoon of sugar and a teaspoon of salt. It's only about a half a teaspoon of salt, or no salt altogether if you don't do salt. So, but it just gives a nice sweet salty flavor to those. All right, so Eileen asks, do you recommend stopping taking prescription acid suppressors during this healing? That is a really good question. So no, I don't, Eileen. I would never recommend to anybody to stop taking any medication that their doctor has prescribed, even though we know the dangers and the risks of acid suppressors, PPIs. I would never recommend for anyone to stop taking your drugs. And the reason for that is because I don't know you, I don't know your condition, I don't know if you have a severely damaged esophagus, if you have ulcers, if you have, the beginnings of Barrett's disease, or even esophageal cancer. And so, you may be on those drugs for a very, very good reason. On the other hand, quitting those drugs might be the best thing you ever did, but I don't know that. I don't know any of you. I don't know your background. So that's really something it's really important to find a doctor that will work with you on these things. In other words, if you go to your doctor and you say, Doc, I really want to get off this drug, will you help me? And if they say, no, you have to take it, then say, well, explain to me why. I want to understand, because I'd really like to get off of this drug. And, there's this crazy lady on Facebook who says, that I could fix these issues naturally. And then hopefully your doctor will work with you to wean you off of that if that's a possibility for you. So, stomach ulcers, I mentioned before, that's a great example. When you have a hole in the lining of your stomach and you're taking an acid inhibitor to weaken that acid production so that hole can heal, and then you go off of that drug cold turkey, that acid's going to build back up and it's going to burn that hole even more, which means you're going to have a hole in your stomach and you could bleed internally. You could bleed to death. So again, I don't know you, I don't know your condition. Now, that being said, I went off of mine cold turkey and I was fine. And people do it all the time, but I would never recommend that because I don't know you. So work with your doctor if you want to get off of your drugs. My mom desperately wanted to get off of her PPIs. She'd been on them, I don't even know. I'll have to ask her. I want to get her in here and do an interview with her because she has such an incredible story of her healing of both her GERD, getting off of her, what does she take? Nexium. Well, she's taken everything, but I think it was Nexium and using coconut water kefir actually to help heal her gut. And she now takes, she's now off of her meds and she is symptom free. So she did a lot of holistic things to support that though. It wasn't just one or two things. It wasn't just eating a certain superfood or taking this supplement. She did a lot of different things. And one of those things you have to do, you know, is starting with the diet, getting, you know, the acidic trigger foods out, eating more fiber, eating more fruits and vegetables. That's very foundational to the healing. Oh, I can't reach. Oh. Okay, Sandy, I'll answer your question later because I see the see more button on there, which means I can't read the whole thing. This is delicious. All right, guys, well, I guess we could hang out and I could eat this in front of you, but I actually have some stuff to do, so I'm going to take my soup into the office and get some work done and eat my soup, but I hope you guys will try this. It really is good. This, I only put in what was like 2 tablespoons of that liquid aminos. I'll probably will put a little bit of salt on top of this just to enhance all these wonderful flavors a little bit more. So anyway, so I hope you guys got something out of this. Again, post your comments and questions below, and hopefully you guys will tune in on Saturday and we'll be talking all about hiatal hernias. Thanks for watching.